Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Andrew from Team Blacktop YGO, and today I'm bringing you a video of a new series. This is going to be an episodic series, hopefully once every week or 2 weeks. I don't know so far. Um, but it's going to be about learning more about Yu-Gi-Oh! I might call this series more about Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like that. But basically, I'm going to be teaching, through these videos, hopefully teaching well, some aspects of the game. And these are aspects that aren't necessarily written down in the rule book or that are explicit to the game, where they are stuff that maybe slang terms that are used, or maybe like techniques or play styles or siding pattern, things like that, that could pertain to the game. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in. Today's episode, the first episode, the premiere episode, is all about engines in Yu-Gi-Oh! And no, I'm not talking about that thing that goes under the hood of your car that 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder, whatever you have. I'm not talking about that engine. I'm talking about engines that help do certain things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. So I guess it helps to define what an engine is at first. And an engine is a small amount of cards. Typically, some engines can be bigger than others, of course. Just depends on how many cards that are needed for the engine. They accomplish a specific purpose on their own, meaning that they each do something different, and they're sort of self-contained. There's not like a huge spider web involved in the deck, like this part connects to this part and this part. It's not intricate. It's usually pretty simple, and it's a pretty confined part of the deck. Of course, this varies. I don't think there's any sort of set definition as to how complicated an engine has to not be in order to be considered an engine, but it's kind of somewhat isolated. So that's one of the other parts of it. And the last part is that it's versatile, meaning that like the deck it's in can still function with it, but it usually aids greatly in whatever the deck is trying to accomplish. And so, what does an engine do? Well, that's a good question. There's usually about three or four things that an engine in a deck does. And so, and it can be any one of these three, or it can be all three, or it can be a combination of several of them. And so, an engine will increase the consistency of a deck, or some engines do at least. Whether that means like seeing key cards more often, or seeing more cards in hand, maybe maintaining advantage. That's another way you could look at consistency. But some engines aim to do that. Some engines aim to provide play extension utility. Now, this is sort of the most generic definition of an engine, meaning that engines accomplish certain things that don't necessarily win you the game or don't necessarily increase consistency, but like they can aid in removal, they can aid in setting up boards, stuff like that. And then the last is establishing a win condition. Some engines, the entire goal of the deck is to get to an engine which establishes a win condition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you some examples of those, that way you can better understand, especially if you're a newer player, what an engine actually is. So under the umbrella of increasing consistency, one of the classic engines that's not really used anymore and wasn't necessarily great back in the day is the Bamboo Sword engine. Basically, the Bamboo Sword engine is a series of cards, equip spells, and a normal spell. And what they do is, in combination with cards like Royal Magical Library and even Magical Citadel of Endymion, their goal is to generate spell counters and draw a bunch of cards. The consistency part here being in that you draw a bunch of cards. Now, the argument could be made for engines like this and the next one I'm about to show you, that they are meant to provide or sort of aid the win condition of a deck. This was played in Deep Draw Exodia, for example, so the win condition is drawing into Exodia. And like I said, engines sort of usually do, one or more of those three different things that they can do. They're usually a combination of those three things. So that's what this engine aims to do. Basically, Broken Bamboo Sword is just an equip spell that does nothing. Cursed Bamboo Sword is an equip spell that can bounce your other Bamboo Sword equip spells. That way you can generate more, spell counters, because none of them are hard once per turns, I don't think. And then Golden Bamboo Sword is a card that just draws you more cards on top of it. And so by, activating those cards over and over again, you can go ahead and keep putting counters on Royal Magical Library, which will draw you more cards, and it just kind of cycles into each other. Another engine used in those Deep Draw Exodia decks was the Blue Eyes and Trade-In engine. You play like 3 Toon Table of Contents, which again would sort of aid your Royal Magical Library in generating spell counters. And you'd eventually search your Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, and hopefully you'd have a trade-in in hand, and then you'd trade in for the Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, and that would give you spell counters while also giving you 2 more draws. It was pretty free. It's pretty free stuff. Like I said, not very common anymore, and it wasn't great back then either, but it's just an example of a consistency engine. And so that I mean, you can kind of see from this what consistency engines are. The next thing are extenders or utility engines. Now, like I said, the engine I'm about to show you, which is the Striker engine, this engine kind of did like two different things. So basically, like all decks that played the Striker engine usually played like triple mobilized Engage and like the Hornet drones. And basically, what you would do with the Hornet drones is you could either like make Kagari and then grab back the Hornet drones and then like play the Hornet drones, so you have like a 1-card Link 2, which was usually pretty good. Sometimes they would, and the way I'm using it as an example here is that sometimes decks would use Hornet drones, make Hayate attack directly, grab like a Widowinker or some other Sky Striker utility card, and they'd use Kagari to add that card back. So in a way, the Striker engine is used for both extending and utility. Just a couple different combinations there, but it was a very resilient engine, especially considering how good of a card Sky Striker Mobilize Engage was. It's a really good card. That's why it's banned now, unfortunately. Sky Striker is one of my favorite decks, and it was very good as an engine. So that's why I'm bringing it up here. And another engine, another example for engines is the sort of win condition type of engine, and for that I chose as an example the Invoked Engine. The Invoked Engine is seeing a lot of play right now. It's seen kind of a lot of play ever since its inception back in 2016, 2017, somewhere around there, from Fusion Enforcers. And basically, the whole point of the Invoked Engine, it's one of the larger engines, I would say. It plays like 3 copies of its field spell, plays 3 copies of Alistair usually, and 2 copies of Invocation. So 8, 9, 10, depending on how you want to count it. Plays quite a few main deck cards and 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 extra deck cards. But basically, like, the whole point of this engine is to kind of establish part of the win condition of an invoked deck. And invoked decks running around now are like Invoked Shaddolls, Invoked Dogmatica. A lot of invoked decks are playing like the Eldritch stuff too. They all kind of do the same thing. They basically sit on like a Makaba, which is part of their win condition, and they just sit on a bunch of traps, or maybe even like a Ecclesia / Fleur de Lis play, and some of them play like the Winda stuff, all that kind of stuff. And it's one of the engines that goes for that deck, and it's part of the deck's win condition. It's not necessarily the main win condition. It's not necessarily, a side engine. It's definitely part of the deck, and it's definitely part of the main win condition. So that's why it's called an engine, and also because it's compact and you can take it out and put it in as you wish. And so now, to basically showcase you one of my favorite examples of an engine, I'm going to showcase you the modern scrap engine as it pertains to Orcust. Now, the modern scrap engine did not come into Orcust at full power when they have all the cards I'm going to show you in this video. Orcust had a hit on the ban list in 2020. I think it was January 2020 when the Eternal format got hit quite severely. They lost Orcust Harpor, and if Orcust had Harpor in that format, well, this engine would be even better, but unfortunately, I'm just going to showcase you what it does right now with our current Forbidden Limited list and the current card pool. So what you need for this engine is basically just 1 scrap recycler, which is what makes this engine good, is that it's very simple. You only need a handful of main deck cards aside from the Orcust cards to make this thing work. And you need either a card you can set, like a spell trap card you can set, or you need your opponent to have a card. And so basically what you do is you go ahead and set your card in normal summon Scrap Recycler, which is going to then dump you Crystron Rosenix to the graveyard. Rosenix's graveyard effect can summon a Crystron token to your side of the field. Basically, the card you send to the graveyard off a Recycler has to generate a token or put a body on board some way. So people used to play Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion before it was banned, so Rosenix is kind of the substitute for that. Alright, so you play Rosenix, you get the token, the Crystron token, and then you go ahead and link these two into Scrap Wyvern. Scrap Wyverns are fairly generic link monster. It only requires 2 monsters, with one of them having to be a Scrap monster. Okay, so you use Scrap Wyvern effect. It revives a Scrap monster from your graveyard, and then it goes ahead and destroys a card you control. So in this instance, you would destroy the Scrap monster you would have just summoned off of the Wyvern, because this triggers the Wyvern's second effect. So its second effect allows you, if a Scrap monster on your field is destroyed, allows you to special summon a Scrap monster from your deck, and then destroy a card on the field. This is why you need either that card in your hand if you're going first, or you need your opponent to have a card. So you special summon like the Scrap Golem, and you destroy your set card, basically, or you destroy a card your opponent controls if you didn't have another card and you're going second, which is I guess you'd say that's probably the more optimum of the two scenarios. Although you probably want to go first with this engine just because it's kind of hard to get this thing off if you go second and have to play through your opponent's interruptions. So it is kind of weak to hand traps and stuff like that, but this is how you play it. Alright, so Scrap Wyvern summons the Scrap Golem, then Scrap Golem effect will summon the Scrap Recycler, and it in turn will dump specifically the World Legacy World Wand. And you need this card because it's a World Legacy card. Then you go ahead and link the Scrap Golem and the Scrap Recycler into the Lib, the World Key Blade Master, I believe it's called. Okay, and Lib has a really great effect where it can set a World Legacy card from your deck provided you have a World Legacy monster in your graveyard. Or either World Legacy card or monster, I'm not sure. But basically what you do is you go ahead and set the succession, and then you'd activate it, and you would summon your Scrap Golem to the zone that Lib points to. Okay? And then Scrap Golem can, since it's not hard once per turn, thankfully, we'll go ahead and summon the Scrap Recycler, and the Scrap Recycler, because it's also not hard once per turn, we'll go ahead and dump for the third time, believe it or not, the third time, it'll dump a machine monster to the graveyard, and it's going to dump your Orcust Nightmare. Now, imagine if we had Orcust Harpor back in the game. Like, this combo would be absolutely insane, because you would, instead of like dumping the Nightmare, you would dump the Harpor, and then that'll give you an extra body. But already we can see from this combo right here, if you're going second with, against no interruptions, which is, highly unlikely, I guess you'd say, but still, it can happen sometimes. This combo generates like +3 in card advantage and sets up your graveyard for Orcust plays. And so from this point, you go ahead and you can like link Lib and Scrap Wyvern off into like Avermax, and Lib, believe it or not, has an effect. If it leaves the field, you get to shuffle one card your opponent controls back into the deck. So it's kind of crazy too. There's a lot of crazy things, this deck, and it only requires 1.5, I guess you'd say. You need a card you can set, so it's kind of specific, but it only requires minimal card advantage out of you. So basically, it goes +2, and you can do Orca stuff, so you can plus even more off of that. But basically, the nice thing about this is that your graveyard is set up for your Orcust plays, because normally, if you just have like Girsu, the Orcust Mech Knight, you only get to dump like the Nightmare into the graveyard, whereas this you get to dump both Nightmare and the World Wand, and so that way you can get access to your symbol skeleton, which is good on your opponent's turn. So that's what makes this an engine. It's only a couple cards in your main deck. I mean, think about it. All you've got is the 3 Scrap Recycler you'd play, Scrap Golem, Christian Rosenix. The Orcust cards don't count. World Legacy Succession doesn't really even count because it's a good generic card all on its own. And you only have like 2 other extra deck cards you have to play, Scrap Wyvern and Lib, and I mean they're both pretty good cards themselves, so it's not like you're losing much. Of course, Orcust is not at full power, but that's kind of an example of what engines do. They sort of facilitate something in this deck. So this engine basically, it increased consistency because you put a lot of Orcust monsters in the World Wand in the graveyard. Okay. It's an extender engine because obviously you went +2. You put some more bodies on board. It has some utility because you can shuffle stuff back with Lib. You can go even further with this engine, like making Phoenix, Unicorn, access code, stuff like that. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. And it helps establish the win condition of this deck, which Orcust's win condition, I guess, is consistency in playing on your opponent's turn. And since you've gotten to your Orcust engine and you have plenty of monsters on the field to facilitate more summons, you've gotten to your win condition. So this one sort of accomplishes all 3, and that's why I chose it as a good example. Okay, but that's kind of what engines are. Engines kind of do all those things. They allow you to have more cards, they allow you to get to your win condition, and then they can help you with extending and removal and all sorts of stuff like that. But the important thing, what it distinguishes them from just the regular cards of the deck, is that they are usually archetypal, meaning like Invoked, Scrap. They're all part of an archetype, and they're self-contained. You can still play Orcust without Scraps. You can still play Dogmatica Eldritch without Invoked. You can play all the decks that had Striker Engine in them without the Striker Engine. That compactness and that removability I guess is a good word, removability, that is probably the defining 2 characteristics of an engine in relation to other cards in a deck. So thank you so much for watching. It's been kind of a long video. The quality of my videos will hopefully improve within the coming months. I'm starting a new job which will allow me to facilitate better videos, I hope, with better equipment and better internet and stuff like that. So please just bear with me there, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I know we don't upload a whole lot. I know it's sporadic, but well, I can't really do much better, unfortunately. Sorry, guys. Anyway, y'all have a nice day, and this is Andrew from Team Blacktop signing off. Peace.